Hello, everybody, and welcome back to day 30 or 31. Oh, 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 I actually can't remember. One of those, day 30, day 31. Today I wanted to talk about something that I feel like a lot of debut comic artists worry about, myself included, is whether your art is good enough to start publishing. And that's kind of like a tricky question to talk about or a tricky topic to talk about because the measurement of good enough is subjective simply because art is subjective. There's, certain quantifiable aspects of a piece of art that can be pointed to and say, this is technically good. Technically being the like the anatomy or the color theory or the use of tools, whether it be digital or traditional. Those are things, the technical aspects of art, the things that have to be actively practiced at, and things that can be seen as improving, like definitively improving. And then there's the non-quantifiable part of art, which is just whether someone likes your style. And that is like an interesting part of the topic because whether someone likes your style is a question independent of whether your style is technically good. And so that's why the topic of like, am I good enough to publish my comic is tricky, is because you're really asking about two aspects of the art consumption experience. And you might be asking about both of those aspects, or you might be asking about one of them, but I wouldn't know which one you're asking about, because that question is kind of vague. So I'll just go over both of them and talk about how they work in conjunction in order to how they work in conjunction and how that makes a reader stay reading your comic. So, we'll talk about the easier one, which is the technical aspect of comic making, and one that is really up to no one but yourself to improve on, which is the technical drawing abilities. Whether the goal of your art style that you have in mind is reached, because it's obvious to say, but I feel like I should say that technical prowess in a person's art is can change depending on whether that person's art style is trying to be a certain kind of style, whether it's realism or cartoon or manga or like hyper-realism or semi-realism, painterly, 2D, 3D, what you're trying to achieve, the end look will change based on who you are personally. So someone looking at my art, if they don't know what kind of style I'm trying to achieve, they can't really say for sure whether I have technical prowess, because that answer for my art will change depending on if I say, oh, I'm going for realism, like hyperrealism, or and then if I was to say I was going for Western graphic novel, you know? So you just gotta like think about that. Like, what are the technical, what's the level of technical ability is needed for your specific art goal, like your goal in whether your art style achieves that style. That sounded like it didn't really make sense. Hopefully this is making sense. I feel like I'm just saying the same words over and over and over again in a different order and being like, but then it's not actually making sense. So basically what I'm saying is, on the question of, is my comic good enough, you can look at your work in comparison to works that you think are within the same style, because it really does you no good if you're trying to compare your Steven Universe-esque cartoon style to a person who does hyperrealism oil painting. There's just nothing to be gained to be comparing those two, because they're not anywhere near the same in style. So looking at works that you want your work to look at, that you think looks good, because that's the important thing, is looking at works that you consider to be at a level of technical ability that if they were a comic, you'd think that it was a well-drawn comic, or even just like, yeah, that's like, all right, because you don't have to be a Picasso, fucking Da Vinci, I'm literally blanking on every artist suddenly. You don't have to be a master at the craft in order to be worthy of posting it. You just have to be satisfied with how it is now. Because the thing with the arts in general, is that it is never finished. The learning and the growth is never, ever done. It is done when you are dead, and that is just the reality of working in a field in which the things that you do every day for work inherently work towards improving your skill. So, it's like, even if you don't ever set aside time apart from your comic making to do any kind of like figure drawing or anything, if you don't intentionally practice and you only do comic work, you're still practicing, because, doing art is practicing art. Now, the level of growth that would happen if you were to purposefully practice would be much greater than if you didn't, but that's beside the point. You're still practicing, and so whether you intend to get better is not up to you. Like, whether you get better is not up to you. If you do it, you will get better. And how fast you get better, though, is up to you. So, you could not post any of your work or start on your comic until you are at a level in which you think you have become quote unquote good enough. But the thing is that you will never see yourself as quote-unquote good enough, because if you set an art goal for 5 years in the future and then you reach them after 5 years, you're gonna feel like you still aren't good enough, because you know in your artist heart of hearts that you can get better. So I say to you, is my comic technically good enough to be posted? And the answer is always yes, because you're never gonna feel like you're good enough, I guess is what I should have been saying instead of you're never gonna be good enough, because that gives off the wrong intention of my words. I meant that you will always see your work as less good than anyone else will see your work, because you are the artist and you know how far you can grow in the future. And so you'll just think, ugh, like maybe I'll wait another 5 years until I'm even better. And then, if you just keep putting it off, it'll never get done. Just do it. Just post it. Because waiting and waiting and waiting will get you nowhere except empty hands. So when I was thinking about starting my comic, I really, really thought about whether I could feel proud of my work if I started it now, later. Like, if I looked back on my work, would I feel proud of it? Not against the standards of how far I had grown since I started it, but from where I was at the time. Because the thing is if you're doing the best that you can do at the time of doing it, then whether or not it's the worst thing you've ever seen in 10 years doesn't matter, because you did the best you could with what you had to work with your skill level, with your experience, and that will always be an achievement, whether you have grown exponentially since then. So for me personally, I know that if in 3 years or so, I look back and think, wow, that anatomy is so bad, or wow, this part, like these panels would have been better like this, or I wish that I made this line of dialogue this instead of this. Even if I do those things, I'll still know that I did the best I could, and so I'll never regret it, I guess, is really what I'm trying to say. Because that's kind of the core of the worry that artists have when they ask that question, when they ask, am I good enough? Is because there's no lack of desire to start. The fact that an artist is asking that question, am I good enough to start working on my comic, means they want to start working on their comic now. But in their mind, they're worrying about if they're going to regret not waiting until they're better. Which is the reason why so many people who put off working on their comics until they're quote-unquote better will spend decades not ever working on their comics, because that worry is indefinite. There is no point in time that a person can definitively say that they at like this date, this month, and this year means that I won't have to worry about regret. Because regret will always be a thing that can happen to you, no matter what point in time you are in your life. you always have the ability to regret things. And so that's why I say ignore what you think you might feel in the future. Because, you know, if you say, I'm worrying that I'm going to regret it in 5 years when I look back on it, and then 5 years pass, you're going to still feel like you're going to regret it in 5 years. You know? Regret can always happen to you. And so, might as well not worry about it. I don't know. I feel like a lot of things that I say about art should be taken into consideration, but can't always be followed, because I know that there are so many people out there who can't help but worry, like whether they have anxiety disorders or mental disorders that force them to worry about things that they don't want to be worrying about, or they have past experiences that just they can't help but worry about things now because of those experiences. And it's like, I wish that I could give universal advice, but that's like impossible. There are so many people who are so different than I am. And there are so many people in different situations, and that will be in different situations than I will be in the future. And so, yeah, I just try to do the best that I can when it comes to like advice and stuff. And I want to leave this video off on my thoughts on the second part of the topic of being good enough, which is the part that you really can't control, which is whether someone just likes your work. Because here's something that is comforting to me when I think about whether a page that I've drawn is up to scratch. And that is that if someone cares about your characters or your world or anything about your comic, they will not care about how it looks as much as someone who is looking at your work for the first time. The comic artist Scott McCloud says in his books on making comics that the most well-drawn comic in the world will not be as popular as a objectively less well-drawn comic if that comic has terrible writing. Because terrible writing, it just fails at making people care about something. And, you know, that's very true, too, because I have exited out of reading webcomics that aesthetically look so good, but whose writing was just the worst. And I don't want to say suffer through, but I will be more willing to give a comic its fair shot if the writing is good, and even if the art isn't anything you'd see in a publishing house on the shelves of Barnes and Noble or whatever. Like, if someone likes your style, they will care, despite any kind of technical quote-unquote failures of the art. And I'm a writer at my foundation, and so that's just how I go about reading new comics, but if someone isn't a writer and they're an artist at their foundation, maybe it's the opposite for them. Maybe they will tolerate terrible writing just to read a comic with really, really good art. You know, like it's there's just nothing you can control on about whether someone likes your work, which for me is really freeing because I know that if I do the best that I can in the writing aspects and the art aspects, then there will be people who will like my work, no matter if it's objectively terrible or not. And, you know, I just gotta kind of look at my stuff and slap myself on the face and say, you're not terrible. You're not bad. You're actually kind of good at art. Shut the fuck up. And then I go through my catalog of finished pieces and I point out all of the things that I like and all of the things that I am happy that I succeeded at and all of the choices that I made, composition or color-wise, that really worked out. And I say, look, see? These are the things that will make people like your work. And you've already done it once, and so you can do it again. So yeah. That's just all I have to say on that. Hopefully that helped some people who are concerned about regretting starting their comic now instead of waiting until they're quote-unquote better, but you know, just do it. Just do it. Just start your comic. Start it right now, because guess what, you will be way better later, which means that when you start now, you will have already built a foundation of readers who will be so excited later when you start like another comic, and you will be even more successful than if you hadn't started your comic now, because you hadn't built that audience in the first place. So, if you think still that I'm wrong, then start your comic now just for the sake of building your audience for your future works. Think about it like that, if you can't think about it in just the blasé, your future self, your future thoughts don't matter kind of way. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video.